before you meet them, you need to understand one thing. This story begins before dawn. 100 acres of Mississippi red clay, still dark, still quiet. A truck moving slow along a fence line that 3 generations of the same family have walked. A man who woke up before his alarm because his body forgot how to do anything else. And then his headlights catch something that doesn't belong. Deep red against iron, not rust. He stops the truck. He runs. What he finds changes everything, not just for him, but for the land his grandfather bled for, the land his father signed his name to keep, the land that someone powerful has already decided belongs to them. She didn't ask him to save her. She asked him not to call anyone. And that difference between rescue and trust is where this whole story lives. Stay with it. The woman chained to his gate didn't ask him to save her. She asked him not to call anyone. Those are 2 very different requests. And Ezra Boone, standing in the pre-dawn dark of a Mississippi October with a flashlight in one hand and bolt cutters in the other, understood the difference immediately, which meant he understood, before she said another word, that whatever had brought her to his property was considerably more complicated than a woman who needed rescuing. He would think about that moment later, about what it meant that her first instinct was not help me but trust me, about how much courage that took, about how much it told him about who she was before he even knew her name. But that came later. First came the gate. Ezra had been awake since 4:45, not because of an alarm. His body had stopped needing one somewhere around year 3 of running the farm alone, when waking before dawn became less of a discipline and more of a reflex. Like the way his hands knew to check the pressure gauge on the south irrigation line without being told. Like the way he drove the east fence perimeter every morning, before the sun finished arriving, the truck moving slow over ground his grandfather had walked on foot 60 years before him. 100 acres of Holt County, Mississippi, red clay and field grass, and the particular silence of land that has been worked by the same family, long enough that the silence feels earned. His grandfather had bought the first 40 in 1961. Cash he'd saved working double shifts at the grain elevator in Laurel for 6 years, living on less than he needed, so he could hold on to more than he'd been given credit for wanting. His father had added 60 more, 1 parcel at a time, over 2 decades of growing seasons that were sometimes good and mostly not. Ezra had inherited all of it at 31, 2 months after the funeral, when the bank called to confirm the outstanding loan balance, and he'd had to sit down on the kitchen floor because his legs stopped working for about 90 seconds. He hadn't told anyone about those 90 seconds. There were a lot of things Ezra Boone hadn't told anyone. He was thinking about the letter on the kitchen table when he saw her. The letter had been there 3 days. Same bank, same return address in the upper left corner, same weight in the envelope that told him everything before he even touched it. 3 months behind. He knew the number without opening it. Had been running the calculation since August, trying to find a version of the math that came out different than it kept coming out. He hadn't opened it yet. He would. Just not yet. He was thinking about the number, the one he kept arriving at, no matter how many times he ran the sequence when his headlights caught something at the east gate. A flash of deep red against the iron. Not rust. Not the clay. Something that didn't belong in a pre-dawn field in October and knew it. He stopped the truck, pointed the flashlight, and then he ran. She was secured to the lower bar of the gate with a heavy industrial restraint. Not rope, not handcuffs. The reinforced plastic kind, the kind built specifically to not give no matter how hard you pulled. Her dress was red, dark red, the color of garnets, the kind of dress that had been extraordinary approximately 12 hours ago, and was now torn at the left shoulder seam and streaked with red clay up the right side. 1 shoe, a pointed heel, black, still on her right foot, left foot bare and slightly swollen at the ankle. Eyes open. Completely, deliberately open. She heard him coming and turned toward the flashlight and looked directly into it, which was the opposite of what a frightened person does. A frightened person flinches, turns away, pulls into themselves. She turned toward it. He slowed down, crouched to her level, kept the flashlight angled down so it wasn't in her eyes. "Can you hear me?" "I hear you." Dry voice, precise. Like someone who had been saving her words and was going to spend them carefully. "Before you do anything, Don't call the police. He looked at her. She looked back. Not yet, she said. Not until I explain. He had the bolt cutters in his hand. He'd grabbed them from the truck bed without thinking. The same way you grab what you need. The same way you grab what you need when you've been maintaining a working farm long enough that your hands know before your brain does. All right, he said. She blinked, seemed to have expected more resistance. All right, he said again. 2 minutes while I get you loose. Then you explain. He positioned the cutters. The restraint was thick but not impossible. He applied pressure, held it, and the plastic gave with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet morning. She brought her wrist to her chest, cradled it without drama. The skin underneath was dark and raw, the kind of mark that comes from hours of pulling against something that wouldn't move. She had pulled. He could see that. She had pulled hard and often, and at some point had stopped, not because she'd given up, but because she'd calculated that stopping was the better use of her energy. He held out the water bottle from his truck. She took it, drank with the careful discipline of someone managing a resource, not gulping the way thirst makes you want to. Ezra Boone, he said. This is my property. She lowered the bottle, looked at him for a moment that lasted longer than comfortable, reading him. The way you read someone when you've learned that trusting the wrong person has consequences, and you're deciding whether this particular person is a different category. Solange Hargrove, she said. He knew the name. Everyone in this part of Mississippi knew the name. Hargrove Agricultural had grain terminals in 4 counties. Their logo was printed on the storage silos. You could see from the highway outside Hattiesburg. Their trucks moved through Holt County twice a week minimum. Victor Hargrove had been written up in the State Business Journal 3 separate times in the last decade. His daughter had been missing for 9 days. Ezra had seen the story on the news and hadn't thought much about it, beyond what anyone thinks when a person goes missing: the brief, helpless acknowledgement of someone else's disaster, and then had gone back to thinking about the irrigation line that needed a new coupling before the pressure dropped further. He thought about it now. 9 days. She didn't look like someone who had been missing for 9 days. She looked like someone who had been held for a portion of those 9 days and had used the rest of them surviving in a way she wasn't going to describe unless she decided it was necessary. Okay, he said. Just that, because what else covered it? Can you walk on that ankle? She tried. Her right leg held. Her left buckled and he caught her arm before she went down. She let him, for exactly as long as it took to stabilize herself. Then she straightened and looked at him, with those dark, measuring eyes, and the expression of someone who had run the financial operations of a $2 billion corporation and was not accustomed to being in positions that required catching. He offered his arm without comment. She took it without comment. They walked to the truck that way. Slow and steady, the sky beginning to go from black to gray at the edges, the morning coming whether or not anyone was ready for it. He drove the quarter-mile back to the house in silence. She looked out the window at the fields rolling by in the early dark, and he left her to whatever she was thinking, because a woman who had just been freed from a gate after however many hours deserved the space to think it. The farmhouse kitchen was warm from the wood stove he kept running through October and November. He pointed her toward the downstairs bathroom, set a folded flannel shirt and a pair of sweatpants outside the door without knocking, started eggs in the cast-iron skillet low heat, patient, the way his mother had taught him. Cut 2 pieces from the cornbread he'd made 2 days ago, had coffee poured by the time the water shut off. She came out wearing his flannel shirt tucked into the ruined dress because the sweatpants had been too long and she'd made a decision about that. Her hair was damp at the edges. She'd wrapped her sprained ankle with the ace bandage from under the sink. He noted that she'd looked for it and known what to do when she found it. She sat at the table, looked at the plate in front of her, then looked at him. Why haven't you asked me anything yet? He set down his fork. You needed to eat first. She stared at him for a moment. Something shifted in her face. Not softening. More like something that had been braced for a certain kind of impact and found a different one. She ate. The October sun was finishing its arrival outside, painting the fields in the amber of early morning. The best hour on this land had always been. His grandfather had said so. His father after him. When she put down her fork, She reached into a small interior pocket stitched into the lining of her dress and produced a flash drive no larger than her thumbnail. Set it on the table between them. "Everything is on this," she said. 14 months of documentation. Transaction records, shipping manifests. The kind of paper trail that doesn't need a lawyer to translate. He looked at the drive, then at her. "Tell me what I'm looking at." So she told him. She had been CFO of Hargrove Agricultural for 4 years, reporting directly to her father, Victor, who had built the company from a single delivery truck and a territory no one else wanted. 40 years of work and stubbornness, and the specific kind of vision that sees what a thing could become before it's become anything. Victor was 65 now and 8 months into recovery from a stroke that had taken some of his mobility and none of his sharpness. 14 months ago, Solange had found the first discrepancy. Small, buried in a quarterly report from one of the grain terminals near Laurel. A number that didn't align with the storage records. Not by much. The kind of difference that most people in her position would attribute to rounding error, to the imprecision that's normal in agricultural logistics, and move on. She hadn't moved on. She went back, looked again, found a second discrepancy in a shipping manifest from 3 months earlier, then a third, then a pattern. The shipment records were clean on the surface and compromised underneath revenue numbers that corresponded to no actual grain. Storage figures that moved in directions that real inventory doesn't move in. Contracts with subsidiary companies that had no agricultural footprint she could find. She had spent 8 months documenting before she was certain enough to move. 8 months of running her regular job, sitting in board meetings, presenting quarterly reports, answering her father's questions and her uncle's suggestions, and the operational questions of a company with terminals in 4 states. 8 months of doing all of that, while spending her evenings building a case that, if she was right, meant someone inside her family had turned her father's life's work into a machine for laundering money from a domestic criminal network spanning 6 states. She went to Desmond directly, alone. Because she thought, and she said this to Ezra without flinching, without making it sound like anything other than what it was. She thought she was giving her uncle the opportunity to correct something before it destroyed everything. Victor Hargrove had spent 40 years building. Desmond had listened to her entire presentation, sat across from her at the conference table in the Jackson office, and listened without interrupting. And when she finished, he leaned back in his chair and told her that her father had always been too soft, that the real world required accommodations that idealists couldn't understand, that the money flowing through the terminals was the reason the company had survived the last decade of margin compression and commodity price volatility, and that she should go home, think carefully about her position, and remember that loyalty was not an abstract principle, but a practical choice with practical consequences. 2 days after that conversation, 3 men she didn't recognize were waiting in the parking structure beneath her apartment building. "They kept me at a warehouse outside Jackson for the first week," she said. The way she said it flat, precise, not performing stoicism, but actually having processed it already, having decided in whatever hour she'd spent in that warehouse that she was going to survive it, and therefore it was information, not devastation. They wanted the drive. I hadn't brought it. I'd hidden it before I went to confront Desmond because I didn't trust the meeting even before it happened. Where? In a storage unit I rented under my grandmother's maiden name. Paid cash. 14 months ago. First week I found the discrepancy. She looked at the drive. I had a backup phone taped inside the door of a second unit. Same name. When they moved me here last night, I had both. He looked at her. She looked back with those eyes that didn't waste anything. "You planned for this," he said. "I planned for a version of this," she said. "I didn't plan for the gate specifically. Why this gate? Why this land?" She reached across the table and turned the phone she'd been charging since she sat down. Slid it toward him. On the screen, a notification from an internal company application. A status update on a file. The header read, "Property Due Diligence Holt County Holdings Assessment." He read it. Read it again. At the bottom, under the property description, Boone Farm, Holt County, MS. 100 acres. Assessment initiated Q2. Q2 was 4 months ago. He set the phone down. The kitchen was completely still. I didn't know, she said. She said it the way a person says something true that they also know sounds convenient. I need you to believe that. I don't know if it changes anything whether you do. But it's true. I didn't know this property was on the acquisition list. I didn't know my gate was your gate. They chose the location. I just ended up here. He thought about that. Thought about the letter on the table. The number he'd been running calculations around for 3 months. Thought about the assessment file on her phone. The corporate language of acquisition. The way a thing that has been in a family for 63 years becomes, in that language, a line item. They were already coming for this place, he said. Before you. Yes. And now you're here. Yes. He stood up, went to the window, looked out at the fields that his grandfather had worked and his father had worked, and that he got up before dawn every morning to tend. The fields that the bank had a claim on. The fields that someone at Hargrove Agricultural had opened a file on 4 months ago. He thought about what his father would do. He thought his father would help her. Not because it was strategic. Not because there was an angle. Because she was in trouble on his land and she was telling the truth. And some things were not complicated no matter how much the world wanted them to be. Guest room is upstairs, he said. Second door on the right. Sleep as long as you need. She looked at his back. You believe me, she said. I believe you didn't know about the assessment file. He turned around. I believe the rest needs more time. She held his gaze. That's fair, she said. Sleep, he said. Things look different after sleep. She went upstairs. He washed the dishes and did not open the letter from the bank. He was checking the south irrigation coupling, the one he'd been monitoring for 2 weeks, the one that was going to need replacing before December, when he heard a vehicle on the road. The kind of slow that wasn't accidental. The kind of slow that was designed to look like nothing, which made it into something. He walked back to the house. 2 men. Dark sedan with government plates that looked correct at a distance and sat slightly wrong up close, the registration stickers too new. The plates too clean for a field vehicle. Both in dark suits, with the posture of men who had been trained to hold their bodies a specific way and had done it long enough that they'd forgotten there was another way to stand. The taller one came forward. Badge out. Mr. Boone, Agent Tilson, FBI. Appreciate you taking a moment. Ezra stopped at the edge of the porch. Didn't come down the steps, put himself in the doorway without making it obvious that was what he was doing. Something I can help you with. We're following up on a missing persons matter. Solange Hargrove. You may have seen something about it. I heard something. You haven't seen anyone on your property in the last 24 hours? Anyone come through? This is private land. He looked at both of them. Not much through traffic. Of course. Tilson smiled. The smile was technically correct and otherwise empty. If you see anything unusual, we'd appreciate a call. He held out a card. Ezra came down 2 steps. Took it. Read it. Put it in his shirt pocket. Appreciate you stopping by, he said. The shorter agent had been looking at the house, at the windows, at the truck parked to the side, at the boot prints in the mud at the bottom porch, step prints that were clearly not Ezra's size, clearly a different tread pattern, clearly made by someone who had come from inside the house and not from the fields. He saw the agent see them. The agent decided not to mention them, which told Ezra everything about what kind of agent he was. The 2 men got back in the sedan, backed out, drove away at the same deliberate slow. Ezra stood on the porch until the car was out of sight. Then he went inside. Solange was at the top of the stairs. She'd been there the whole time, standing back from the landing window, far enough from the glass that she wouldn't be visible from below. She'd known exactly where to stand. She hadn't needed to be told. The tall one, she said. Tilson. I noticed. He was at a Hargrove internal event 14 months ago, a logistics conference in the Jackson office. He was in the hallway outside the finance division. He wasn't a participant. She looked at Ezra steadily. He was there with Desmond. Ezra climbed the stairs, stopped 2 steps below her, so their eyes were level. So either he's not FBI or he is, she said, and Desmond has him. They looked at each other. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that both options were equally bad, and the difference between them was mostly semantic. Away from the windows, he said. I already worked that out. She looked at him. What are you going to do? Make a call. He paused. Someone I trust. Not on the house phone. Who? Sheriff Loretta Sims. She knew my father. He flushed her face. She's the right person. Solange was quiet for a moment, running the variables. He could see it happening behind her eyes, the same focused calculation he'd seen when she looked at the irrigation coupling, when she'd read the phone notification, when she'd held the bolt cutters in her hands, and understood what they were for. All right, she said. He went out to the workshop, found the CB radio his father had kept maintained, long past the time anyone used CB radios, out of a philosophy about always having a second channel, checked the battery. Good. He contacted Loretta on the frequency she'd given him years ago, written on a piece of paper he still had in the kitchen drawer. Loretta Sims had been sheriff of Holt County for 11 years. Before that, a deputy for 8. A woman who had grown up watching this county and made a specific decision about what to do with her life that she had never second-guessed. She had been his father's friend the way people become friends in difficult places, not by choice, exactly. More by recognition. The recognition of people who understand the same things about the same landscape. She didn't say much on the radio, she never did. 2 hours, she said. West Pasture Gate. Come alone. He went back inside. Solange was in the kitchen, not sitting, standing at the window with a coffee mug, looking out at the fields. Not restless, she didn't seem like a person who was ever simply restless. More like someone trying to understand a thing on its own terms before making a judgment about it. Your land, she said. Not a question. Thinking out loud. 3 generations, he said. My grandfather bought the first parcel in 61. She was quiet for a moment, watching the fields. 63 years, she said. My father talks about legacy, about building something that lasts. She paused. He means the company, the brand, the contracts. She turned from the window. He doesn't mean this. No, Ezra said, he wouldn't. She heard something in his voice, looked at him carefully. What do you want for it, she said. When you think about what this land is supposed to become, what do you want? Nobody had ever asked him that. Not in those words. Not in any words, really. Most people who cared about the farm asked about the finances or the crops or the equipment. His sister asked about the bank. His neighbors asked about the yield. Nobody asked what he wanted it to become. He looked at the window, at the fields beyond it. I want it to still be here, he said. When whoever comes after me needs it to be here, she held that. Turned it over. That's not a small thing, she said. No, he said. It's not. Ezra Boone arrived at 11 without calling. She never called. His sister had a specific gift for appearing at moments when he would have preferred. She didn't, combined with another gift for being exactly right about when she was needed. And those 2 gifts existed in permanent tension with each other. She came through the back door in heeled boots and a camel coat that had no practical relationship to farm country. She was carrying a paper bag from the bakery in town, and wearing the expression of a woman who had made a decision about something and was here to execute it. She stopped, looked at Solange in Ezra's flannel shirt at the kitchen table, looked at Ezra, looked at the 2 coffee mugs, looked at the flash drive on the table, looked at Ezra again with an expression that was doing several different things simultaneously. Tell me, she said. Come inside, he said. She was already inside. Sit down. Ezra Boone was 33 years old and had been directing Ezra's life with varying degrees of success since she was approximately 8. She'd left Holt County at 22 for Jackson, built a real estate practice through the combination of natural ability and the willingness to outwork everyone around her, and had constructed a professional life that looked nothing like where she'd come from, except in the ways that mattered most. She drove a car that made no sense on Mississippi back roads, and wore coats that made farmers' wives look twice, and had called Ezra every Sunday for 12 years without being asked to. She set the bakery bag on the table, sat across from Solange, looked at her the way she looked at everything directly, without performance. I know who you are, she said. I assumed you might, Solange said. That's either useful or a problem. Depends on the next few minutes, Solange said. Ezra looked at Ezra. He looked back. She turned to Solange. Start talking, so they did. Ezra watched his sister's face as Solange laid out the situation again, the documentation, the drive, the 9 days, Desmond, the men at the gate, the agents who were not what their badges said. Ezra listened the way she listened when something mattered. which was completely and without interruption, which was unusual enough that Ezra noted it. When Solange finished, Dija was quiet for 10 seconds. Then she reached into the bakery bag, took out a piece of cornbread, and set it in front of Solange without comment. Solange looked at it. Something passed across her face that she controlled before it fully arrived. "I haven't eaten real food in several days," she said. "I know," Dija said. "Eat it." She looked at Ezra. He looked at the table. "We need to call Loretta," Dija said. "Already done." "Not on the house phone, CB radio, good." She paused. "And Ezra. That letter from the bank." He kept his eyes on his coffee mug. "It's been on that table for 3 days," she said. "I'm aware of how long it's been on the table. Open it. Whatever it says. We deal with it. We have always dealt with it." He looked at her. She looked back with the expression she'd been deploying against him for 30 years, the one that said she knew him better than he knew himself in this particular area, and they both knew it. Solange was looking at her coffee mug with the careful attention of someone giving two people a moment of privacy in a room where there was nowhere to go. "One thing at a time," Ezra said. Dija pressed her lips together. "Let it go. For now." He met Loretta at the west pasture gate at 2 o'clock. She was already there when he pulled up, leaning against her personal truck in civilian clothes, hat off, arms crossed. She looked at him the way she'd been looking at him since he was 12 years old, measuring something, deciding something. "Tell me," she said. He told her everything. She listened without writing anything down, without interrupting, without showing him what she was thinking while she thought it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the pasture. "The agents this morning," she said. "Government plates. Looked right. Felt wrong. Because they were wrong." She looked at him steadily. "I got a call this morning from the state police. A property inquiry flagged as connected to an ongoing federal investigation. Run through an FBI field office. A pause with weight in it. The agent's name on the inquiry retired 14 months ago." Ezra stared at her. "Someone used a retired agent's credentials to run a records check on Boone Farm," Loretta said. "This morning, a few hours after 2 men in a government-plated sedan showed up at your gate." She uncrossed her arms. "They're scared. Scared people move fast and sloppy. That's useful. What do you need? 2 days. Don't use the main phone line. Don't go anywhere predictable." She put her hat back on, "And there's something else." He waited. "Aldous Whitfield," she said. The name landed. Aldous Whitfield had been his father's closest friend and a federal agent for 26 years before he retired to a property outside Meridian and built a woodworking shop. He had given the eulogy at the funeral in the voice of a man who had seen enough hard things to speak about them, without his voice breaking. Ezra had his number on a piece of paper his father had given him. Had never called it. Had understood it was for a situation that his father had hoped would never arrive. "He's already been briefed," Loretta said. "I called him an hour ago." She looked at Ezra. "He said to bring whatever documentation she has. He said to come soon." "How soon?" "Soon as you can move without being seen doing it." He drove back to the farm. The afternoon had turned into the kind of October afternoon that doesn't know it's supposed to feel ominous. Clear sky. Good light. The fields looking like something you'd paint if you could figure out how to paint something that was both beautiful and your responsibility at the same time. He parked, sat in the truck for a moment, thought about the letter from the bank on the kitchen table, thought about Solange Hargrove, who had spent 14 months building a case alone, who had gone to her uncle alone, who had survived 9 days of being held and transferred and used as leverage, and had come out of it still thinking clearly, still protecting the drive, still choosing what to trust and what not to. Thought about what kind of person plans for things not going right before the thing has even happened. Thought the kind of person who has been taught that planning is survival. The kind of person who has never been able to assume that things would simply work out. He went inside. Solange was standing at the window, not looking at the fields this time, looking at the road, watching for vehicles. She turned when he came in. He told her about Loretta, about the retired agent's credentials, about Whitfield. She listened. Then, she picked up the flash drive from the table, held it in her palm, looked at it for a moment in the way a person looks at the thing they've been carrying so long they'd almost forgotten what it was like before they were carrying it. "When do we go?" she said. Tomorrow. Before dawn. She nodded. Solange. He looked at her directly. The 9 days. Before they moved you here. I need to understand the full timeline. If anyone's going to help us, they need to understand it too. She met his eyes. I was held at a warehouse property outside Jackson for 7 days, she said. Commercial building, old grain broker operation. They kept trying to negotiate. I kept telling them I didn't have the drive with me, which was true. She paused. On the 8th day they stopped negotiating. On the 9th they moved me here. Another pause. I think Desmond wanted the location to be meaningful. This land was on his acquisition list. He wanted my father to find out I'd been held here. Another message. Another one. The first was taking me from the parking structure. The second was holding me 9 days without going to the media or the police, which showed my father what Desmond was willing to do. She looked at the window. This was the third. Leave his niece on land that Hargrove Agricultural was planning to acquire. Show Victor that Desmond had no limits. She looked back at Ezra. He underestimated one thing. What? Who found me? He looked at her. She looked back. And neither of them said anything else about it, because it was one of those things that didn't need more words than it had already been given. That evening he made dinner and they ate at the kitchen table. And at some point the conversations moved from the immediate problem to the kind of talking that happens when two people have been through something together and the immediate danger has briefly receded and the space that opens up is either awkward or something else. It was something else. She asked him how the farm worked, not the finances. She'd already worked out the finances from the conversation about the bank. The actual work. What a day looked like. What the irrigation system did, and why it mattered, and what happened to a crop when the pressure dropped and nobody caught it in time. He explained it. All of it. The way he'd explain it to anyone who was genuinely asking, which meant without shortening things, without assuming she couldn't follow. She followed everything. Asked 2 or 3 questions that were good questions. Didn't ask 10 more to perform interest. At some point she said, my father took me with him on delivery routes when I was young. Before the company got too big for the owner to drive routes himself. He knew every farmer. Knew the land. He doesn't anymore. No. She was quiet. He knows the company, he knows the board. He knows the quarterly projections and the operating margins. She looked at the table. I don't think he knows what the terminals actually look like from the inside anymore. And Desmond does. Desmond has always known exactly what everything looks like from the inside. She paused. That's how he hid it. He thought about that. About the specific advantage of the person who is willing to understand how something actually works, as opposed to the person who is satisfied with understanding how it's supposed to work. He thought about his father, about the farm, about the difference between owning something and knowing it. The documentation, he said. You built it alone. Yes. For 14 months. Yes. While running the CFO job. Yes. She looked at him. I didn't have anyone to trust with it. Not inside the company. Not yet. A pause. And if I'd brought in someone else and been wrong about them, the whole thing unravels before it's complete. So you carried it alone. She looked at the table. I carry most things alone. He understood that. More specifically than she knew. He almost told her about Tuskegee right then. Stopped himself. Decided it wasn't the right moment. Then she said, you know things about agriculture you couldn't have learned just from working this farm. The way you talk about irrigation efficiency. The way you read soil quality. She looked at him. Where did that come from? And the moment arrived anyway. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, I had a scholarship. Agricultural Sciences. Tuskegee University, full ride. He looked at the window over the sink. My father got sick 8 weeks before I was supposed to leave. Serious enough that the doctors were using the kind of language that changes the shape of every conversation that comes after it. She was still. I called the program director. Deferred 1 year. Then the year became 2. Then he had a better stretch and I thought about going back. Then the drought started. He stopped. Then he passed. How old were you? 24 when I deferred. 31 when he passed. She looked at him for a moment. Does anyone know? That there was a scholarship? No. Not Dija. Especially not Dija. He almost smiled. She would have made it a project. Found a way to fix it retroactively somehow. He paused. It didn't need fixing. I made the choice. My father needed someone here. The land needed someone here. That's what I had to give, and I gave it. Do you regret it? He looked at the table sometimes. Not the choice. The version of the life I didn't get to have. He paused. Those are different things. She looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said. They are. And he understood that she was not only agreeing about Tuskegee. He went to bed at 10. Set the alarm for 3:15. Lay in the dark for a while and thought about the letter from the bank still on the kitchen table. He got up, went downstairs, picked up the envelope, opened it, read it, stood at the kitchen window in the dark and looked at his fields for a while. Then he put the letter back in the envelope and set it by the CB radio and went back upstairs and lay in the dark and thought about what his grandfather had done with 40 acres and a belief that it was worth holding, and what his father had done with 100 and what he was going to do with the same 100 now. He didn't sleep particularly well, but he didn't expect to. And at 4:45, because his body had long since stopped needing an alarm to know what time it was, he was already awake when the 3:15 alarm went off, which meant he had 90 minutes of darkness and his own thoughts before the next thing had to happen. He used them. He thought about Solange Hargrove, who had spent 14 months building something alone that most people wouldn't have had the discipline or the courage to build, who had planned for things going wrong before they went wrong, who had survived 9 days of being used as leverage and come out of it still thinking, still choosing. He thought about the flash drive sitting on the kitchen table. He thought about the assessment file on her phone. Boone Farm, 100 acres. Assessment initiated Q2. He thought about 3 generations of hands on this red Mississippi clay. He thought, some things are worth protecting. He thought, some things require you to protect them. He got up, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen window in the dark, watching the fields that weren't visible yet, but were there the way they'd always been there, days beenen, waiting for the morning to find them again, the way they always had been, the way they were going to keep being. The second morning was different from the first, not in the obvious ways. The sky still came up the same. The rooster 2 farms over still made his announcement at the same unreasonable hour. The coffee still brewed in the same 12-cup pot that had been sitting on that counter since before Ezra could reach it, but something had shifted. The way air shifts before weather, before you can name what's coming. Solange was already in the kitchen when he came downstairs, not sitting. Standing at the window with her coffee mug, the way he stood at the window with his coffee mug, which he noticed and did not say anything about. She'd found a pair of his old work pants folded in the hall closet too long, cuffed twice at the ankle, and a gray thermal shirt that she'd tucked in with the kind of automatic neatness that told him she was the kind of person who tucked things in even when no one was watching. Her hair was pulled back and up, the thick coils contained but not flattened, and the morning light was doing something with the angle of her face that he made himself stop looking at after about 4 seconds. She heard him on the stairs. Didn't turn around. How bad was the letter, she asked. He'd come back upstairs after midnight. Hadn't knocked on her door. Hadn't said anything. The number was his to carry, until he decided otherwise. Manageable, he said. She turned around, looked at him with those eyes that processed information the way good accountants do, not emotionally, but not coldly either, just accurately. Ezra. 90 days before they moved to the next stage. He went to the coffee pot, which means 90 days to figure something out, which is 90 days more than some people get. She watched him pour. What stage comes next? Foreclosure proceedings. He said it flat. The way you say a word you've been practicing saying without flinching, which is not happening. So we move on. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned back to the window. Show me the irrigation system today, she said. All of it. Not just the south coupling. You don't need to want to understand what I'm asking you to protect. She didn't turn around. Show me. So he did. They went out into the early morning, the October air cold enough now that their breath showed. He walked her the full perimeter of the irrigation system. Every line, every fitting, every junction box and pressure valve, and the 3 places where the original pipe from 1978 had been spliced with newer PVC, because replacing it all at once would have cost more than he had.
She asked questions the whole time, good ones.
Not the questions of someone performing interest, but of someone who actually wanted to know how water moved through land, and why it mattered and what happened when it didn't. At the East Junction, she crouched down next to a coupling he'd flagged as suspect. Looked at it. This one's worse than you said yesterday. It'll hold another 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, I'll have figured out the budget by then. She looked up at him from her crouch. Or I could... No. She stood up, brushed her hands on the work pants. You didn't let me finish. You were going to offer money. I was going to offer a solution. Same thing. He looked at her. This farm doesn't run on someone else's money. It never has. My grandfather borrowed from the credit union in 1961 and paid it back in 4 years and swore he'd never do it again. My father held that line. I hold that line. She was quiet for a moment. That's stubborn, she said. It's principle. Principles don't fix irrigation couplings. Neither does charity. She pressed her lips together, looked at the coupling, looked back at him. What if it wasn't charity, she said carefully. What if it was compensation? For what Desmond's company did to your property value. For what he was planning to do. He hadn't thought about it that way. He could see she knew he hadn't. And he could see she knew he wasn't going to agree to it today. 2 weeks, he said. Coupling holds 2 weeks, she let it go. For now. They worked through the morning in a rhythm that had started to feel less like 2 people being careful around each other and more like 2 people who had quietly agreed on a way of moving through shared space. She carried things without being asked, held fittings while he tightened them, learned to read when he needed silence and when he was open to conversation, which was a thing that took most people considerably longer to figure out. At the tractor shed, he checked the belt he'd been monitoring. She stood at his shoulder and watched, and he explained what he was looking at and why, and she listened with the kind of focus that made him feel, strangely, like what he knew was worth explaining. My father used to say the machine tells you what it needs if you're willing to listen, he said. My father said the same thing about the numbers. She paused. He meant it differently, but maybe not that differently. He looked at her. She was looking at the tractor belt, thinking about something else. He built everything from nothing, she said. Victor Hargrove started with a truck and a territory, and no one who thought he was going to amount to much. He drove the routes himself, knew every farmer, knew the land. She paused. He used to take me with him on Saturdays when I was little, before the company got too big for Saturday routes, before there were people to do everything for him. Ezra tightened the last bolt. You miss that version of him, he said. It wasn't a question. She was quiet for a moment. I miss knowing which version of him I was dealing with. He understood that. The way a person can become someone you have to read carefully instead of someone you just know. He let Desmond have too much, she said, for too long. And I think... She stopped, tried again. I think part of why I went to Desmond alone was because I didn't want to find out whether my father already knew. Ezra set down the wrench, looked at her directly. And now, he said, from what you found on the drive, she met his eyes. He didn't know about the money laundering. I'm almost certain. The documentation shows Desmond kept it completely partitioned. A pause. But the land acquisition files, the ones where farmers were being pressured to sell. She looked away. My father signed off on 2 of those deals. Desmond would have briefed him as normal agricultural expansion, legitimate purchases. Victor would have had no reason to question it, but his name is on it. His name is on it. The weight of that sat between them. Ezra had watched his father sign things. Documents, agreements, the back of checks, that represented the difference between making it through another season and not. He knew what it meant to have your name on something. How it could become either your legacy or your liability depending on what someone else did with it afterward. He'll want to make it right, Ezra said. I know. This is over, I know. She said it like she'd already decided something, like she'd been carrying the decision for a while, and had just now let him see the shape of it. He picked up the wrench again, moved to the next thing, and she moved with him. That afternoon, Deja came back. She didn't knock, she never knocked. She came through the back door with a bag of groceries she'd decided they needed and the expression of someone who had been thinking hard about something since this morning and was ready to have a conversation about it. Solange was at the kitchen table with the flash drive and Ezra's old laptop going through files. She looked up when Dija came in. Dija looked at the laptop, looked at the groceries in her own hands. "You're working," Dija said. "I'm organizing." Solange closed the laptop. "What did you bring? Food?" "Because my brother doesn't stock a refrigerator like someone who expects to have guests." She started unpacking. "Also because I've been doing some thinking." Ezra came in from the hallway, saw his sister's face. "What kind of thinking?" he said. Dija set a container of red beans on the counter, turned around, and the expression on her face was the one she'd had when she was 19 and had done something she needed to tell him about. He recognized it immediately, because it was the same expression she'd had the 3 times before, when she'd done something she needed to tell him about, which was not a good sign. 3 months ago, she said, a broker called me. Referral from a client I'd worked with twice. Commercial land acquisition. Holt County. He said the buyer was a holding company looking at agricultural land in the area. Standard expansion. He sent me a preliminary assessment file. She paused. I signed a referral agreement. For the initial survey stage, Ezra went very still. Dija. I didn't know who the buyer was. The holding company had a different name. 3 Holdings LLC. Nothing that connected to Hargrove in the filing. She looked at Solange. I only found the connection 2 days ago, when I looked up the LLC after I saw your name in the news. Solange had not moved, had not changed expression. What was in the assessment file? She said. Property valuations for 6 parcels in Holt County. A breath, including this one. The kitchen was quiet. Ezra was looking at his sister. Dija was looking at the counter. Solange was looking at some middle distance between the two of them, running calculations that weren't visible on her face but were definitely running. Your signature is in Desmond's files, Solange said. Not an accusation. A statement of fact. Yes. Which means Desmond has a document that places a Boone family member in cooperation with the acquisition process. I know what it means. Deja's voice was controlled. Barely. I'm telling you because you need to know. Not because I'm asking for. I know why you're telling me, Solange said. And I'm not angry at you. She looked at Deja directly. You were used. The same way my father was used. The same way anyone is used by someone who understands that good faith is a vulnerability. Deja was quiet for a moment. I should have done more due diligence, she said. Yes, Solange said. And you didn't know you needed to. That's how it works. Ezra looked at his sister, at the tension in her shoulders, at the particular way she was holding herself that he recognized as the posture of someone waiting to be told what they already knew. You were trying to grow your business, he said. You were doing your job, Dija. My signature is in his files, Ezra. I know. He held her gaze. We'll figure it out. She pressed her lips together, nodded, once, then turned back to the grocery bag because she needed to do something with her hands. Solange opened the laptop again, pulled up the acquisition file she'd been cross-referencing. 3 Holdings LLC, she said. I've seen that entity name. Let me look for it. She typed for about 45 seconds. Stopped. There, she said. It's a subsidiary of a subsidiary. 4 layers down from a Hargrove operational shell. She turned the laptop so Deja could see. The signature Desmond has from you is on a document that also has 2 forged signatures from a county assessor who retired in 2019. She paused, which means your signature is on a document that's already compromised. A good attorney dissolves that in about 3 hours. Deja looked at the screen, then at Solange. You found that in 45 seconds, she said. I've been living in these files for 14 months, Solange said. I know where things are. Deja looked at her for a moment, then at Ezra, then back at Solange. All right, she said. What do you need from me? By late afternoon, they had a working map on the kitchen table. Not a literal map. A sequence. What Aldous Whitfield would need. What order the documentation would have to be presented. What the chain of custody for the flash drive had to look like for it to be admissible in any federal proceeding. Whitfield was the piece they kept coming back to. Aldous Whitfield had been a federal agent for 26 years before he retired to a property outside Meridian and built a woodworking shop he spent most of his time in. He'd been his father's closest friend, had given the eulogy at the funeral in the voice of a man who had seen enough hard things to speak about them without breaking. Ezra had his number, had never called it. The number existed for the kind of situation his father had always hoped would never come up. "He'll need to see it himself," Ezra said. "The drive. Not copies. Not descriptions, I know." Solange was looking at the map. "Which means I have to travel." She looked up. "Which means I'm visible." "Not if we go the right way." "What's the right way?" "Back roads, my truck." Before dawn, he looked at her. "You ever drive through central Mississippi on a highway where the speed limit is 55 and everyone does 40? She looked at him. "No," she said. "Then this will be educational." That almost made her smile again. Almost. Dija, who had been listening from the counter, said, "I'll go with you." "No," Ezra said. "Ezra, if something happens, someone needs to be here who knows what's happening. Someone who can reach Loretta. Someone who's not in the truck." Dija opened her mouth, closed it. "Someone who can also call a property attorney," Solange said, looking at Dija. "About that referral agreement." Dija looked at her, then at her brother, then at the table. "Fine," she said. "I'll stay. Then. But I'm making dinner first, and neither of you is going to argue with me about it." Nobody argued. She made red beans and rice the way their mother used to make it, which was the way their grandmother had made it, which involved a step with the seasoning that Ezra had watched performed his entire childhood and still couldn't replicate on his own. The kitchen smelled like something that had been true for a long time. Solange ate 2 full servings, didn't comment on how hungry she was. But Dija noticed and said nothing, and refilled the bowl without being asked, which was its own kind of conversation. After dinner, Dija left for Jackson with a list of things to look up, and a property attorney's number saved in her phone, and the specific expression of a woman who was channeling guilt into action, which Ezra recognized as the most Dija thing she had ever done. The house was quiet after she left. Solange helped him clear the table without discussion. They moved around the kitchen the same way they'd moved around the farm that morning. Finding the rhythm. Not talking about finding the rhythm. "Tell me about Tuskegee," she said at some point. Not looking at him. Drying a bowl. He handed her another one. "I got the scholarship at 22, he said. Agricultural sciences. Full ride. My father was," he paused. "He was proud. More proud than I'd ever seen him about anything that had to do with me specifically." He looked at the window over the sink. "He got sick 8 weeks before I was supposed to leave. Serious enough that the doctors were using words that changed the shape of a conversation." She was still drying the bowl, but she'd gone very still. "I called the program director," he said. "Deferred for 1 year. Then the year became 2. Then he had a good stretch and I thought about going back. Then the drought started. He stopped. Then he passed." She was quiet. "I never went." She looked at him. "Does anyone know that you deferred? That it happened?" "No. Not even Dija? Especially not Dija." He almost smiled. She would have made it her project. She would have found a way to fix it. And it wasn't something that needed fixing. It was a choice I made. My choice. He turned and leaned against the sink. "My father needed someone here. This land needed someone here. That's what I had to give, and I gave it." She looked at him for a moment. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Sometimes." He said it without apology. "Not the choice. Just the version of the life I didn't get to have." He paused. "Those are different things." She set the bowl down, turned to face him. "Yes," she said. "They are different things." And he understood that she was not only agreeing with him about Tuskegee. That night, he set up the CB radio on the kitchen table and ran a test signal to the frequency Loretta had given him. Clean connection. Good signal. He logged the scheduled check-in time for tomorrow morning and wrote it on a piece of paper that he put in his shirt pocket. Solange sat across from him and went through the flash drive files one more time. Organizing. Sequencing. Building the clearest possible narrative out of 14 months of documentation. She had a particular way of working. Focused and quiet and completely unself-conscious about it. She didn't perform concentration. She just was concentrated. It was, he thought, one of the more interesting things he'd seen in a person. At 10 o'clock, he told her they needed to leave at 3:30 in the morning. 3:30, she said. Before anyone who might be watching expects movement. All right. She saved the file, closed the laptop. Then I should sleep. Second door at the top of the stairs. She stood, picked up the flash drive and tucked it into the pocket of the work pants. Then looked at him. Ezra. She said his name the way she'd said it a few times now. Not formally. Not casually. Somewhere in between. Like a thing she was getting used to. Thank you. For today. You worked, he said. You don't have to thank someone for letting you work. She looked at him for a moment. No, she said. I suppose you don't. She went upstairs. He sat at the kitchen table for a while longer, looking at the letter from the bank that he'd opened and read and folded back up and set beside the CB radio. 90 days. The number was manageable if something changed. It was not manageable if nothing changed. He thought about what Solange had said about compensation, about the difference between charity and what was owed. He thought about his grandfather's hands on 40 acres of Mississippi red clay in 1961. What it had cost. What kind of person you had to be to keep holding on to something that the world kept trying to find reasons to take from you. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. He did not sleep particularly well, but that was nothing new. 3:15. His alarm. He was already awake. He dressed in the dark, made coffee in a thermos, brought the truck around to the side of the house, where it wouldn't be visible from the road until they were already moving. Solange came downstairs at 3:22. Dressed, boots laced, hair back, the flash drive already in her pocket. She looked exactly like someone who had learned how to be ready quickly. She looked at the thermos. There's a cup in the... I see it. She found it on the counter, poured, handed it to him first. He took it. They didn't speak again until they were in the truck and moving, the farm disappearing behind them in the dark, the headlights cutting ahead through the black of the county road. The route to Meridian ran through the kind of Mississippi countryside that doesn't look like much at 3 in the morning and looks like everything at noon. Flat stretches of harvested field, stands of pine, the occasional lit window of a house where someone else was also awake at this hour for their own reasons. Ezra drove the back roads, the ones that connected farm to farm without touching the highway. He knew all of them. Solange watched the dark go by outside the window. At some point she said, "How far?" "Hour 40. Maybe less on these roads." She nodded, drank her coffee. 20 minutes later, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, staying back, same distance, for about 4 minutes. He didn't say anything. She noticed him check the mirror a second time. "Behind us," she said. "Maybe." "How long?" "Long enough." He took the next turn without signaling. The headlights took the same turn, same distance, same speed. "Not coincidence," she said. No, he thought. He knew these roads. He knew which ones connected and which ones dead-ended, and which ones ran through the back of a property where a gate might or might not be locked on a Tuesday morning in October. He took a left onto a road that wasn't marked. Gravel. His headlights showed the tree line closing in on both sides. Solange gripped the door handle but didn't say anything. The vehicle behind them took the turn. Ezra accelerated. Not wildly. Controlled. He knew this road too. Had ridden it on a four-wheeler with his cousin 20 years ago. It curved right, then hard left, then opened into the back of a property that had a secondary gate onto a different road entirely. He went through the gate. It was unlocked. He'd known it would be. The other vehicle did not follow. Either they didn't know about the gate, or they decided it wasn't worth it. Ezra drove another mile before he exhaled. Solange was looking at him. "You've done that before," she said. "Once or twice. In a truck. Once. Twice it was on foot." He looked at her. "You want to hear that story?" She looked at him for a moment, and this time, finally, she did smile. "Small. Real. Later," she said. Drive, he drove. Aldous Whitfield's property sat at the end of a gravel road that went on about 3/4 of a mile longer than you thought it was going to. The house was low and wide, the kind built before anyone decided houses needed to be impressive from the outside. A woodworking shop attached to the east side with its own entrance and a light on inside, which meant the man was already up, which meant the man had been expecting them. He came to the door before they knocked. 68 years old. Gray at the temples and the jaw. everything else still solid and sharp. He looked at Ezra the way a person looks at someone they've watched grow up from a distance and are now reconciling with the adult version. Then he looked at Solange. "I know who you are," he said. "I assumed you might," she said. "Come in." The inside of the house was all books and woodworking tools, and the smell of coffee that had been going a while. He had a table cleared in the kitchen. 3 chairs. A lamp positioned specifically to illuminate the table surface. He had been expecting them. Specifically, "Loretta called me," he said, sitting down. "Last night, after she talked to you." He looked at Ezra. "She was worried you'd try to get here without telling me you were coming." "I told her I'd tell you," Ezra said. "She said you'd say that and then possibly not actually do it." Ezra looked at the table. Whitfield almost smiled. "She knows you." Solange set the flash drive on the table. Whitfield looked at it for a moment, then produced a laptop from the shelf behind him. "Old. Good. The kind of machine used by someone who knew what they needed a machine to do and had chosen accordingly." He plugged in the drive. He read for 20 minutes without speaking. Neither Ezra nor Solange said anything. They drank the coffee he'd poured for them and waited and let him work. When he finished, he sat back, looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then at Solange. "You built this documentation yourself," he said. "Over 14 months," she said. "Yes. Chain of custody is clean. I pulled everything directly from the company servers using my own CFO credentials before I went to Desmond. Everything I accessed I had legal authorization to access. I pulled it before he could revoke my credentials." Smart. He looked at the drive. "This is enough to open a federal investigation. Enough for a prosecutor to build on." He paused. "But you need to be the one to hand it over. In person. To the right task force. Not the local field office." "Because Desmond has people in the local field office," Solange said. "Because I don't know who Desmond has where," Whitfield said. "And I'd rather not find out the hard way." He looked at Ezra. "I have a contact. Retired like me, but with current connections to the right people. I can make a call this morning." "How long?" Ezra said. "To set the meeting, 2 days. Maybe 3. He looked at both of them. "You need a safe place for those 3 days." "The farm," Ezra said. Whitfield looked at him. "They already know about the farm," Solange said. "They know I'm there," Ezra said. "They don't know what we have. And they won't move on private land without cause. Not yet." He looked at Whitfield. "Will they?" Whitfield considered. "No. Not yet. Desmond's still trying to look legitimate. Moving on a private farm in Holt County draws exactly the kind of attention he can't afford right now." He nodded slowly. "The farm works." For 2 days. They stayed at Whitfield's for another hour, going through the documentation, building the sequence for how it would be presented. Whitfield made notes on paper, actual paper, with a pen. He was thorough and unhurried, and had the kind of quiet authority that came from having been in rooms where things were decided and understanding exactly how those rooms worked. When they stood to leave, he walked them to the door. He looked at Ezra for a moment. "Your father would have handled this the same way," he said, quietly, without asking permission. Ezra looked at him. "He would have called you sooner." "Yes." Whitfield nodded. "He would have." A pause. "But he also would have waited until he was absolutely sure before he moved. And you waited so." He held out his hand. Ezra shook it. Whitfield looked at Solange. 2 days, he said. "Stay off the main roads and Miss Hargrove Solange." "Solange." He looked at her directly. "The documentation is excellent. You did that right. Whatever happens from here, you did that right." She held his gaze for a moment. "Thank you," she said, and meant it in a way that was visible. They drove back. Different route, longer, slower. No headlights following. The sun was coming up by the time they turned back onto the county road toward the farm. The October light doing what October light does in Mississippi, making everything look like something worth holding on to. Solange was quiet most of the drive back, looking at the road ahead, thinking. Halfway home her phone buzzed. The backup phone. The number displayed was blocked. She showed it to Ezra. He looked at it. Looked at the road. "Don't answer," he said. It buzzed again. Same number. Then a text came through. 3 words. She read it. Her face changed. "What?" he said. She turned the phone so he could see it. 3 words. "We have Dija." Ezra's hands tightened on the wheel. Then his own phone buzzed. On the seat between them. A different number. Unrecognized. He pulled over. Picked it up. Not a text, a photograph. Dija. In the passenger seat of a dark vehicle. Looking at the camera with an expression that was not afraid. That was furious. Which told him she was okay. Which told him she was more than okay. Which told him she had already started working out how to handle this herself. Which was exactly who Ezra Boone was in every situation that required her to be. But she was in a vehicle he didn't recognize, with a person he couldn't see, on a road he couldn't identify. Solange was looking at the photograph too. "They're not going to hurt her," she said. "Desmond doesn't do that. It's not his method. He applies pressure. He negotiates. He uses people as leverage." She looked at Ezra. "This is him telling us he knows about her. Telling us he has something we want back. What does he want? The drive." She paused. "Or me?" Ezra stared at the road ahead. He thought about Dija making red beans and rice at his kitchen stove. The way she'd poured Solange's bowl without being asked. The way she'd looked when she left last night, channeling guilt into purpose the way she always had, the way she'd always done, turning the things she'd gotten wrong into something she could fix. "He's not getting either," Ezra said. His voice was quiet, the quietest it had been. Solange looked at him. "Then we need to be smarter than he is," she said. "Faster than he expects us to be." She was already thinking. He could see it. The way her mind moved when it was working at full speed. "Call Loretta now. Tell her about Dija. Tell her Whitfield is making contact today. Tell her we need to move the timeline." She said 2 days. "Tell her we don't have 2 days." He looked it back. "Call Loretta," she said again. Firm, clear. The voice of a woman who had run financial operations for a $2 billion company and knew what it meant to make a decision when the information was incomplete and the cost of waiting was higher than the cost of moving. He picked up the CB radio from the back seat, called the frequency. Loretta answered on the second signal. "We have a problem," he said. "How big?" she said. "Big enough, tell me." So he did. And while he talked, Solange sat beside him in the early morning Mississippi light, with the flash drive in her pocket and her hands steady in her lap, looking at the road ahead with the expression of someone who had already decided what they were going to do next, not afraid, ready, which was, Ezra thought, one of the bravest things he had ever seen. And he had seen some things. Loretta Sims did not panic. That was the first thing Ezra noticed when he finished talking. The CB frequency held a beat of silence. Then her voice came back even and measured, and already thinking 3 steps ahead of the problem. "Where was Dija last seen?" "Left the farm around 8:30 last night." "Jackson. She have her regular phone on her?" "Yes. I'll ping it through the department system. Give me 20 minutes. A pause. "You too. Where are you now?" 2 miles out from the farm." "Go home. Stay there. Don't use the main phone line." Another pause. Shorter this time, and Ezra. "This changes the timeline, you understand that? That's why I called." "Good." The line clicked. Ezra set the radio on the seat. Drove. Solange was looking at the road, not at him. At the road ahead, the way she looked when she was working through something that required more than one layer of thinking at once, which was most things he'd noticed. Most things got at least 2 layers from her. He thought, she's already 3 moves ahead. He thought, I need to catch up. They pulled into the farm as the morning settled into full light, October doing its best work. The fields gold and still, the kind of morning that had no business existing on a day like this one. But October in Mississippi didn't much care about context. He parked. They went inside. Solange went straight to the table, opened the laptop, pulled up the documentation sequence she'd built the night before. She was moving differently now, not panicked, but accelerated, like a clock that had been ticking at normal speed, and someone had just turned the dial. The timeline Whitfield needed was 2 days, she said without looking up. "We don't have 2 days, I know, which means we need to do 2 things at once instead of 1 thing at a time, which are, get Dija back, and get the documentation to the right hands before Desmond realizes we're moving." She looked up. "If he finds out Whitfield is involved, if he finds out who Whitfield is calling, he'll move on us before we can move on him. So we don't let him find out. Which means we move today." She held his gaze. Can Loretta get your sister out today? If she finds her? Yes. Then that's what happens today. She looked back at the screen. And while Loretta handles that, you and I figure out how to get this drive to Whitfield's contact without anyone knowing we're doing it. He looked at her. She looked back up at him. And neither of them said anything about what this meant, about what it would take, about the number of things that could go wrong between now and a version of today where all of this worked out. Because some things you don't say out loud, because saying them changes nothing, because they already know. He made coffee. She worked. He sat across from her and thought about Deja. Deja, who made red beans and rice in a kitchen that wasn't hers. Deja, who had poured a stranger's bowl without being asked. Deja, who had stood at his counter with a grocery bag and told him the thing she needed to tell him with exactly the amount of courage it takes to say a hard thing to someone you love. He thought, she's sitting in a car somewhere being furious. He thought, good, stay furious. The CB radio crackled at 22 minutes past the mark. Loretta. Got a hit on the phone, she said. Signal stationary. Property off Route 49, about 8 miles south of Jackson. Old commercial building. Grain broker used to operate out of it. A pause that meant something. It's a Hargrove subsidiary property. Ezra closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them. She's not hurt, Loretta said. I've got a deputy running a visual right now. Passive surveillance only. 2 vehicles on site, 3 individuals visible. Another pause. Deja's phone has been moving inside the building. Voluntarily, she's not restrained. Solange, who had been listening, said, he's not going to hurt her. This is pressure. Loretta's voice came back. I'm inclined to agree. But pressure has a way of becoming something else if we wait too long. She was quiet for a moment. I'm going to go get your sister, Ezra, personally. I'd like to do it in a way that doesn't require anyone to explain to a judge afterward why it happened the way it did. What do you need from us? I need you to stay at that farm. Her voice sharpened slightly. Just slightly. Both of you. I need Desmond's people focused on you. If they think you're sitting still, if they think you're scared and waiting, they won't expect me coming from the other direction. Ezra looked at Solange. She nodded once. We'll be here, he said. 20 minutes, Loretta said. Maybe 30. Keep this channel open. The radio went quiet. He set it down. Solange was already thinking about the next problem. He could see it. The way she'd go still for a moment, and then her hands would start moving again, scrolling, organizing, building, because her mind and her hands were connected in a way that meant you could always tell when she'd landed on something. Whitfield's contact, she said. Where does that handoff happen? Whitfield arranges it. The location comes from his side. When was he making the call this morning? She pulled out the backup phone, looked at it, put it back in her pocket. We need that call to have already happened, she said. We need Whitfield's contact to already be in motion. She looked at him. Can you reach Whitfield directly? Not through Loretta. I have a number. Use it. He used it. Whitfield answered on the second ring, which for a man who'd spent 26 years in federal work meant he'd been expecting the call. Ezra told him about Deja, about the photograph, about Loretta's timeline. Whitfield was quiet for 4 seconds. Exactly 4 seconds. Then he said, I made the call at 7 this morning. Contact is already moving. We can do the handoff today if you can get to Hattiesburg by 2 o'clock. We can be there. There's a federal building on Hardy Street. My contact will meet you in the public lobby. Her name is Investigator Baines. She'll find you. He paused. Don't bring anything else, just the drive and Solange. Understood. And Ezra. One more pause. The kind that carries weight. Once that drive is in federal hands, Desmond loses his leverage. Everything he's holding over anyone changes the moment that happens. You understand what I'm telling you? I understand. He looked at Solange. She had heard every word. 2 o'clock, she said. 2 o'clock. She stood up. Then, we have a problem. 1, right now. 1. She looked at him. If Desmond's people are watching this property, if they see us leave before Loretta gets Deja out, they'll know we're moving, she thought. We need to leave without looking like we're leaving. He thought about that. Then he thought about Pete Grayson, whose property backed up to the east side of Ezra's land along the old drainage ditch. Pete, who was 71 years old and had been trading favors with the Boone family since before Ezra was born. Pete, who kept an old Chevy Suburban in his barn that he hadn't driven in 3 years but maintained because he maintained things. He thought about the back gate, the one that opened onto the drainage service road that ran behind 3 properties before it connected to the county road 2 miles east. He thought, you don't leave through the front when you have a back. He explained it to Solange in 2 sentences. She said, can Pete be trusted? Absolutely. Then call him. He called Pete. Pete Grayson said, I'll have the Suburban running when you get to the gate, and then hung up. 4 seconds. That was the conversation, which was Pete Grayson in total. They had an hour and 15 minutes before they needed to be moving. Solange used the time the way she used all time. Completely. She organized the documentation into a sequence that could be walked through in under 10 minutes for someone who needed to understand what they were looking at fast. She wrote 3 pages of handwritten notes on the legal pad she'd found in his kitchen drawer, a summary that could stand alone if the drive needed context. She folded the notes and tucked them into the inside pocket of the work jacket he'd given her to wear against the morning cold. He spent the time checking that everything at the farm was as it should be. Locked what needed to be locked. Left the lights on the timers the way he always left them. Fed the animals. Did all the things that made the property look like a place that expected its people to come back. Because he expected to come back. He was going to come back. He just needed everything to look normal for anyone who was watching from a distance. At 10:40 the CB crackled. Loretta's voice. Calm. Clean. She's out. Ezra pressed his hand flat on the kitchen table. Dija's out, Loretta said. She's with me. She's fine. She is extremely angry, which I am taking as a good sign. The tiniest pause. She says, and I am quoting here, that you should stop worrying and go do what you need to do. Something in his chest that had been wound tight for the last 2 hours released. He looked at Solange. Solange looked at the table. Her jaw moved once. Then she composed herself. Straightened. Good, she said. Just that. But her voice said everything else. He picked up the radio. Tell her I'll call when it's done. She knows, Loretta said. Go. They went out the back. Through the east gate down the drainage service road, the dry grass brushing the underside of his boots and the morning air cold enough now that Solange's breath showed in short, visible puffs as she walked. She didn't hurry. She kept pace, steady, like someone who understood that running draws attention and walking does not. Pete's barn gate was open. The Suburban idled inside. Pete himself was nowhere visible, which was intentional and which was Pete. Ezra took the wheel. Solange got in the passenger side. He backed out, went through the gate, took the service road east to the county road, and turned south without touching the highway or passing within view of the main entrance to his property. They drove. He thought about Dija in Loretta's cruiser. Furious. Safe. Already making a list in her head of everything she was going to do about this. He thought about the flash drive in Solange's jacket pocket. 14 months of documentation. Hundreds of millions of dollars of evidence. A paper trail that Desmond Hargrove had been certain no one would ever follow all the way to the end. He thought about his grandfather's 40 acres, his father's 60 more, 100 acres of red Mississippi earth that someone had decided was worth taking. He drove. The federal building in Hattiesburg was the kind of building that tried to look neutral and mostly succeeded. Glass and concrete. A lobby that could have been anything. People moving through it who could have been anyone. They were inside at 1:47. Investigator Baines found them in 3 minutes. 50s. Short natural hair going silver at the temples. The particular posture of someone who had been doing serious work for a long time and had no patience for things that wasted it. She looked at Solange, said her name. A confirmation, not a question. Yes, Solange said. We have a room. She looked at Ezra. He stays, Solange said. Not a request. Baines looked at him for a moment. Then, come on. The room was small. A table. 4 chairs. A recording setup that Baines activated without ceremony. She had a colleague who did not introduce himself and did not need to. He had the look of someone whose job was to sit in rooms like this one and listen and remember. Solange set the flash drive on the table. Baines looked at it, picked it up, held it. Walk me through it, she said. So Solange did. Ezra had heard the outline. Twice. He'd heard her practice the sequence in the truck on the way here. But hearing her deliver it in this room, to these people, with the recording light on and the weight of what it meant, pressing down on all of them, that was different. She was composed, precise. She took them through the documentation chronologically. The first discrepancies she'd found, the methodology she'd used to verify, the 14 months of building a case that was airtight before she moved. She explained how the money moved, how the shipping manifests worked as cover, how the numbers were constructed to look legitimate to anyone not looking at them the way a CFO would look at them. She explained Desmond's network, domestic distribution, 6 states, the specific company structures he'd used to compartmentalize. She explained what she'd done when she confronted him, what he'd said, what had happened after. She explained the acquisition files, the farms, the methodology of identifying properties under financial pressure and approaching them through intermediaries, so the name Hargrove didn't appear until the deal was already structured. She looked at Baines when she said that last part. Boone Farm in Holt County, she said, was one of the properties on the acquisition list. Baines glanced at Ezra. He held her gaze. "I understand," Baines said. The meeting ran 90 minutes. When it was over, Baines held the drive in her hand and looked at Solange with an expression that was not warm exactly, but was something adjacent to respect. "This is thorough," she said. "I had 14 months and you built it alone." "Yes, that's." Baines paused and usualized. "In my experience," she set the drive down. "We'll need you available, possibly as a witness, I understand. And your father's signature in the acquisition documents." "He was misled," Solange said. "I can demonstrate that." She looked at the table. "I intend to demonstrate that." "All right." Baines stood. "We're moving on this today. What Hargrove has done with your..." She stopped, looked at her notes. "With Ezra Boone. That changes what we can do and how fast we can do it." She looked at Ezra. "Your sister is with the Holt County Sheriff?" "Yes." "Good. She's safe. And what happened to her gives us something we didn't have this morning." She said it clean, not unkind, just accurate. "It gives us grounds." They left the building at 3:40. The afternoon had warmed into something almost generous, the kind of fall afternoon that feels like a gift. They sat in the Suburban in the parking lot for a moment, not talking. Then Solange said, "It's done, not all the way done." "No." She looked at her hands. "But the part I could do, that part's done." He looked at her profile, at the line of her jaw, at the way she was holding herself, not with the performance of composure but with the real thing. The kind you build by doing hard things alone for a long time. "You held that together for 14 months, he said. "Barely." She was quiet for a moment. "There were nights I thought I'd gotten it wrong, that I'd misread the numbers, that I was about to blow up my father's company over an accounting error." She paused, "and then I'd check again, and the numbers would still be what they were." "You didn't get it wrong?" "No." She turned to look at him. "I didn't." His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A number he didn't recognize, and then a name he did. He showed it to Solange. "Desmond Hargrove." They looked at each other. He answered. "Put it on speaker." The voice was smooth, unhurried. The voice of a man who had spent decades in rooms where he controlled everything, still performing that control, even when it was already gone. "Mr. Boone." Almost warm. "I appreciate you taking my call." Ezra said nothing. "I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot," Desmond said. "I understand you've been protective of my niece. I respect that. It's an admirable quality." A pause. "But I think if we sat down, you and I, we could find a resolution that works for everyone." "What kind of resolution?" Ezra said. "The kind where everyone keeps what they value." Another pause. Shorter. "I know about the farm situation, Mr. Boone, the bank letter. I know that property has been in your family for some time. I have the ability to make that problem disappear entirely." He let that sit. "All I need is for Solange to come home, and for whatever documentation she may have gathered to be understood in the right contexts." Ezra looked at Solange. She was looking at the phone. Her expression was the particular expression of someone watching a person make a very specific mistake. "Mr. Hargrove," Ezra said. "Yes. She's not coming home to you." A beat. "I'd encourage you to think about this more carefully. And the documentation you're talking about," Ezra said, "has already been delivered." He paused. Today to a federal investigator in Hattiesburg. Another pause. So whatever you were going to offer, it doesn't matter anymore. The line was silent for a long moment. When Desmond spoke again, the smoothness was still there. But something underneath it had shifted. A very small, very telling shift. You should be careful, he said, about what you've set in motion. Mr. Hargrove, Ezra said, I grew up on 100 acres that people like you have been trying to take for 3 generations. You're not the first person who's told me to be careful. He paused. I'm still here. He ended the call. The Suburban was very quiet. Then Solange said, I'm going to need a moment. Take your time because... She stopped. Because I've been imagining that conversation for 14 months. What I would say to him when it was over. She looked at the phone in his hand. I didn't say any of it. You did. He looked at her. She looked back. And then she laughed. Short. Real. The first real laugh he'd heard from her. It came out slightly surprised, like it had gotten past her defenses before she could direct it. You couldn't have called first, she said. Let me have one line. There wasn't time, he said. But he was almost smiling. There was absolutely time for one line. Next time. She pressed her lips together, controlled the smile. But it had been there. He'd seen it. And the seeing of it did something to the inside of his chest that he was going to think about later, when he had the time to think about things carefully. He started the truck. They drove. At 5:17, Loretta Sims called to say that federal agents had arrived at the Hargrove Agricultural offices in Jackson, and at 3 subsidiary locations in 2 counties. Simultaneously. At 5:41, she called again. To say that Desmond Hargrove had been taken into custody at the offices, without incident, which meant he'd gone quietly, which meant he'd known at some point in the last 2 hours that it was already over. At 6:03, a text from Deja, I'm at Loretta's. I made coffee. Where are you? Ezra showed it to Solange. She read it. Read it again. She made coffee at someone else's house, she said. That's Deja. She's fine. She was always going to be fine. He meant it. He'd meant it the whole time. She's too stubborn to be anything else. Solange handed the phone back. They drove back through the early evening, the sky going amber and deep rose, and then the particular dark blue that comes right before full night. Mississippi at dusk, long and flat and burning at the edges. She was quiet for most of it. Not the careful quiet of the first morning, but a different kind. Something that had more space in it. At some point she said, My father is going to want to talk to you. He glanced at her. He will, she said. When this is settled, when he understands the full extent of what Desmond was doing. She paused. He's going to want to understand the farm, the acquisition list. He's going to want to know what was almost taken from you. He doesn't owe me anything. He'll think he does. She looked at the road. Victor Hargrove built his company on the idea that land meant something, that the people who worked it deserved to keep it. Kest. She paused. And his name got put on a list of properties to be stripped from families like yours. She looked at him. He'll need to do something about that. It's who he is. Ezra thought about that. Thought about a man who'd built a company from a single truck and a territory and a belief that working for something meant something. Thought about his grandfather's 40 acres. Let him figure out what that looks like, Ezra said finally. One thing at a time, she almost smiled. You say that a lot. It keeps being true. The farm came into view as they turned off the county road. The lights on the timers doing their job. The fields dark and quiet. The old gate at the end of the drive standing where it had always stood. He pulled in, parked in the usual spot. They sat in the truck for a moment, in the way that you sit in a vehicle after a thing has happened and the world is still reorganizing itself around what has changed. What happens to the company, he said. After this, the board will convene. She said it like she'd already run the sequence in her head a dozen times. They'll want to minimize, control the narrative. They'll offer me something to manage the transition. She paused. I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do. What does it depend on? How honest everyone's willing to be. She looked at him. Including me, he understood that. The particular way honesty was sometimes the harder and more complicated thing than being right. They went inside. He fed the animals. She made tea because he didn't have coffee left, and she'd found a box of his mother's old chamomile in the back of the cabinet and decided that was sufficient. She was standing at the stove when he came back in. "I called my father," she said, without turning around. "While you were outside." He stopped in the doorway. "He cried," she said. "He didn't want me to hear it, but I did." She was quiet for a moment. "He said he was sorry. Not just for what Desmond did. For not seeing it sooner. For letting Desmond stand too close for too long." She turned around. Her eyes were clear. "He said he'd been waiting for me to call. That he'd known something was wrong. That he'd been telling himself it wasn't because—" She stopped. "Because knowing would have required him to do something. And now he knows. And now he knows." The kettle made its sound. She turned back to it. Poured 2 cups. Set one on the counter for him. He picked it up, stood across from her. And they stood in the kitchen of the farmhouse that had belonged to Boone's for 63 years, drinking chamomile tea at 7 in the evening, after the longest day of maybe both of their lives. And it was the most ordinary, extraordinary moment he had ever been part of. His phone buzzed. "Loretta again," he answered. "You need to know something," she said. Her voice had a particular evenness to it, the kind she used when the news was significant. And she'd already processed it and was now delivering it clean. "The filing that Desmond put in this morning. The federal complaint against Solange. I know about it. His legal team submitted supporting documentation this afternoon. To establish credibility, they included operational details about shipment routes and terminal capacities." She paused. Baines flagged it within 40 minutes. The specific figures Desmond included in the complaint matched transaction records in Solange's documentation exactly. Another pause. He used information that proved he controlled the system he was claiming he had no knowledge of. Ezra looked at Solange. She had heard. She'd been watching his face. "He put it in the legal filing himself," Ezra said. "His lawyers are probably having a very specific conversation with him right now," Loretta said. He ended the call. Looked at Solange. She looked back. "He was trying to make the complaint look credible," she said slowly. "So he used real numbers. Numbers only he could have known." "Yes." She looked at the ceiling for a moment. "He was too careful," she said. "He wanted it to look perfect, so he made it too specific." A pause. "And that specificity is what proves he controlled everything." "Yes." She looked at him. "He destroyed himself with his own documentation," she said. "The same way he built the scheme," Ezra said. "Everything documented. Everything traceable." He paused. He just forgot that it traced back to him. The tea was cooling in their hands. Somewhere outside, something moved in the fields. A night bird. Wind. The land settling into dark the way it settled every night. Patient. Indifferent to whatever had happened that day. Whatever happened above it. The land went on. "Tomorrow," Solange said. "What does tomorrow look like?" "I have a fence section on the north end," he said. "Irrigation check on the east line. Belt on the tractor was getting close." He looked at her. "And someone is going to call from the bank about the letter." She held his gaze. "And you'll answer this time." "I'll answer this time." She nodded. Not romantic, not a declaration. Just an acknowledgement that tomorrow existed and had things in it that needed attending to. Which was, he thought, exactly right. He put his cup in the sink. Turned off the light above the stove. "Second door at the top of the stairs," he said. "I know," she said. "I've been there 4 nights, right?" He paused. "Good night, Solange." She looked at him. "Good night, Ezra." He went up. She stayed in the kitchen a moment longer, looking at the window, at the dark fields beyond it, at the particular way land looks at night when it's yours, when it's been yours, when it's going to keep being yours because someone did something hard and kept doing it. Then she turned off the last light and went upstairs. Outside, the 100 acres of Boone land lay quiet under the October night sky. Every fence post, every irrigation line, every worn spot in the north pasture, every piece of red clay earth that 3 generations of hands had worked. Still there, still holding. Inside, the kitchen light was off. Solange's work jacket still hung by the back door. The flash drive was on the table where she'd left it. And neither of them had said anything yet about what came after tomorrow. 3 weeks passed. Not quietly. Nothing about those 3 weeks was quiet. There were federal interviews and legal filings, and a civil proceeding that Solange's attorney described as complex but navigable, which Ezra had learned was attorney language. For this is going to take a while and cost more than you want to think about. There were news stories. There were board meetings at Hargrove Agricultural that Solange attended via video call from a hotel in Jackson because she hadn't gone back to her apartment yet, and she hadn't fully explained why. There were calls from Victor. Long ones. The kind where a father and daughter talk around the thing they need to say until one of them finally says it. Ezra knew about the calls because she told him. Not everything, but enough. He knew that Victor had wept again. This time on purpose, in the middle of a sentence, without trying to hide it. He knew that Solange had sat with that, had not rushed past it, had let her father be undone because she understood, finally, that letting someone be undone in front of you was its own form of love. He knew that Victor had asked about the farm. He knew what Solange had told him. He knew because she'd told him that too, the morning after, standing at the kitchen window, with her coffee mug in the way she'd started doing. The way that had stopped seeming like something she was borrowing, and started seeming like something she'd always done. The investigation moved fast once it moved. Baines and her team were efficient in the way that federal investigators become efficient when the documentation is clean and the evidence trail is clear, and the subject has accidentally provided additional confirmation through his own legal filings. Desmond's attorneys spent 2 days arguing that the operational details in his complaint had been fabricated by Solange. Then someone produced the internal server logs. Then someone produced the access records. Then the 3 subsidiary managers, who had been quietly negotiating immunity agreements for 6 weeks, signed their cooperation agreements and stopped being quiet. Desmond Hargrove was formally indicted on a Tuesday. Solange was in Hattiesburg for a follow-up interview when it happened. Ezra was checking the east irrigation line. He got the text from Loretta. Read it standing in the middle of a field with red clay on his boots and his phone in his hand. He texted Solange. She texted back 4 minutes later. 2 words. I know. And then, after a pause that he could feel even through a text message, how's the irrigation line? He looked at the message for a moment. Then he texted back, holding, and meant it 2 ways. She came back on a Thursday, 22 days after the night she'd turned off the last kitchen light and gone upstairs. 22 days since he'd driven back through the early dark to the farm that had been his family's for 63 years, and stood in the kitchen and thought about how much had changed in a week and a half and whether he knew what to do with that. He didn't know she was coming. She hadn't said. He was at the north fence, the section that had been needing attention since before any of this had started, driving posts with the manual driver because the hydraulic one had a hose he hadn't had time to replace. Physical work, the kind that required all of your body and left just enough of your mind for thinking. He heard the car on the gravel before he saw it. Not his truck. Smaller engine. A rental, probably. Turning in off the county road, coming slow up the drive. He didn't stop working. He drove the next post. And the one after that. The car parked. He heard the door. Footsteps on the gravel, then on the grass, then the softer sound of someone walking toward him across the pasture without worrying about their shoes. He drove one more post. Then he set down the driver. Turned around. She was maybe 30 yards away. Jeans, a simple cream-colored blouse, no collar, tucked in at the waist. Flat shoes that were not practical for a pasture and that she was wearing anyway. Her hair down. The thick coils moving slightly in the November wind. No laptop bag. No flash drive. No evidence of the version of herself that had arrived on his property 3.5 weeks ago. With one shoe and a ruined dress and a determination to not need help that she'd needed anyway. Just her, walking toward him across his pasture like she'd done it before. Because she had. She had, actually. He waited. She stopped about 5 feet away. Looked at the fence line. At the new posts he'd driven. At the wire stretched taut between them. You finished the north section, she said. Finally. It looks straight. Fences generally do when you take your time with them. She looked at him. He looked at her. I didn't call, she said. I noticed I was going to. Then I thought, she paused. I thought, if I called you'd tell me it was fine and I should take my time and there was no rush. And then I'd take your word for it and take my time, and it would have been 3 more weeks. He considered that. You're not wrong, he said. I know I'm not wrong. She looked at the fence line again, then back at him. I brought something. She held out a folder, not thick, 6 or 7 pages. He took it, opened it. Read the first page. It was a property assessment, professional, detailed. Current market value for a 100-acre agricultural operation in Holt County, Mississippi, based on comparable sales, current productivity, and projected yield capacity with updated irrigation infrastructure. The number at the bottom was considerably more than the bank thought the land was worth. He turned the page. A second document, a financing proposal, not from a bank, from a newly established agricultural foundation. Low interest, long-term, tied to no conditions beyond continued agricultural operation. He looked up. She was watching him, read. Not nervous, just watching. "This isn't charity," she said, before he could say it. "It's what the land is actually worth. And it's what a foundation created specifically to support black agricultural landowners in the South is designed to do." She paused. "My father established it 2 weeks ago, with the first tranche of assets recovered from Desmond's network. The legal team said it was the cleanest use of the recovered funds." Another pause. Boone Farm would be the first recipient. He looked at the document. He thought about his grandfather. 40 acres, 1,961. He thought about his father's face when the deed was framed. He thought about the letter from the bank that he had opened and read and put back in its envelope and put in the kitchen drawer. "The foundation's board," he said. "Who's on it?" 6 members, 3 with agricultural backgrounds, 1 land rights attorney, 1 financial officer. She paused. "And 1 person who has spent the last 3 weeks learning more about irrigation infrastructure and fence line maintenance and soil composition than she ever anticipated." He looked at her. She looked back. "Victor wanted to call you himself," she said. "I told him I'd rather do it in person. And if I'd said no on the phone, then I'd have come anyway." She said it simply. "Because the foundation is real and the assessment is accurate. And you deserve to know both of those things regardless of what you decide." He closed the folder, looked at the north fence line, at the posts he'd driven that morning, at the wire running straight and taut the way a fence was supposed to run. "One thing at a time," he said. She almost smiled. "Always. Let me think about it. Take your time. Not 3 weeks." "No," she agreed. "Not 3 weeks." He tucked the folder under his arm, picked up the post driver. "I have 2 more sections to finish before dark," he said. She looked at the remaining fence line, at the posts stacked beside the truck, at the reel of wire waiting. "Show me how to hold the wire while you drive the post," she said. He looked at her shoes. She looked at her shoes. "I know," she said. "I'll ruin them. You were planning to anyway." "I was planning to," she agreed. So he showed her. She learned fast. She always learned fast. She held the wire with both hands and kept the tension even and didn't flinch when the driver made contact and didn't pretend it was easier than it was. They worked the afternoon, together. The November sun lower now than it had been 3 weeks ago. The light coming in at the long angle of late fall that made everything look like something worth keeping. They talked while they worked. Not about the investigation. Not about the foundation. About smaller things. She told him that Deja had called her twice since everything had ended, that the first call had been about the property referral agreement and the legal resolution of it, that the second call had been about something else entirely and had lasted an hour and a half. He looked at her. An hour and a half. "Your sister talks," Solange said. "I'm aware. She told me about the time you drove 4 hours to Jackson in a thunderstorm, because she locked herself out of her apartment on New Year's Eve." He kept his eyes on the fence post. "That happened once," he said. "She said you didn't complain." "I complained the whole drive. She said you brought food." He drove the next post. "It was a long drive," he said. Solange laughed. Not the surprised short laugh from the parking lot in Hattiesburg. A real one. Easy. The kind that came from a person who was somewhere they'd decided to be, which did the thing to the inside of his chest again. The same thing it had done in Hattiesburg. Except more so, because this time they were on his land, his fence line, the north section he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. She was here because she'd come, not because she'd had to. He thought, say something. He thought, or don't. Don't ruin it. Don't make it a thing it doesn't need to be made into yet. He thought, there's time. And that particular thought, felt like the most solid thing he'd had in a long time. The idea that there was time. That time existed and was available for this, and that he didn't have to decide everything today. They finished the last fence section at 4:47. The sun was thinking about setting, the fields going amber at the edges. The particular gold that made Ezra think of his father's words about the best hour of the day. He stood back and looked at the finished fence line, running straight from the northwest corner all the way to the east gate. 3 weeks of meaning to. Done. It's good, Solange said. It is. She was standing beside him, looking at the same thing. Close enough that he was aware of the specific distance between them. He thought about saying something. He thought, one thing at a time. He said, "You hungry?" She looked at him. "I've been thinking about your cornbread since I left," she said. "It's not that good, it absolutely is." She turned toward the house. "Come on." He followed her, and thought, this is a thing. Whatever this is, it's a thing, which was not particularly eloquent, but it was true. And on this particular farm, in this particular family, truth had always counted for more than eloquence. Deja arrived at 6:15 with a bottle of something good and the expression of someone who had known she was going to arrive at 6:15 and had timed it precisely. She walked in the back door, found them in the kitchen, Ezra at the stove, Solange at the table with a mug of tea, reading something on her phone. Deja looked at the scene, looked at Ezra, looked at Solange, set the bottle on the counter. "Well," she said. "Good." Ezra pointed at the cabinet where the glasses were. Deja got 3. Poured. Set one in front of Solange and one beside the stove for Ezra. She sat down across from Solange, picked up her glass. Solange picked up hers. "To surviving the week," Deja said. "The month," Solange said. They clinked. Drank. Ezra cooked. He made the cornbread. Made greens the way his mother had made them. Long and low with the pot liquor, that was the whole point. Made chicken, because there was chicken, and because it was November and cold food was not the right choice. Deja talked while he cooked. About the property referral case, which her attorney had resolved cleanly in 11 days. About the 2 new clients she'd taken on in the aftermath, both of them agricultural landowners who had been approached by Desmond's shell companies and wanted help understanding what they'd almost agreed to. "You're building a practice," Solange said. "I'm building something," Deja said. She looked at her glass. "I want to do more of it. Help families understand what they have, what it's actually worth." She paused. "What to look for when someone's trying to take it." Solange was quiet for a moment. "The foundation is going to need someone on the ground," she said. "Someone who understands the local market, the families, the history." She paused. "Someone who knows how to read a contract and knows when to tell someone to get a lawyer instead of signing." Deja looked at her. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm describing a need," Solange said. "What you do with that is your business." Deja looked at Ezra. He kept his eyes on the pan. "You knew about this," Deja said. "I know about the foundation," he said. "That's all I know." Which was true, and also not the whole truth, but close enough for a Thursday evening. Deja turned back to Solange. "Tell me more about this need," she said. They talked through dinner. All 3 of them, the way families talk over food, circling back to things, interrupting, following a thread until someone dropped it and someone else picked it up. Ezra said less than the 2 women and listened more and was not uncomfortable with that arrangement. At some point, Deja said, "What are you going to do about the company?" Solange set down her fork. "The board wants me to take over," she said. "There are conditions." "There are always conditions," Deja said. "They want a controlled narrative. They want the story to be about a bad actor who has been removed and a company that is now clean." She paused. "They don't want it to be about the systemic failures that allowed Desmond to operate for as long as he did." "And you want it to be about those failures," Ezra said. She looked at him. "I want the truth to be the story," she said. "Whatever the story is." A pause. "Including the parts about my father. Including the acquisitions he signed off on without knowing what they were." She looked at the table. 2 families got pushed off land because of documents Victor Hargrove signed. "I can't build something on top of that without naming it." The kitchen was quiet. "What does your father say?" Deja asked. "He says to tell the truth." Solange's voice was even. "He's been saying it since I called him from the parking lot in Hattiesburg." She paused. He also said he's coming down next week to Holt County. She looked at Ezra. He wants to see the farm. Ezra looked at her. Why this farm specifically? Because this farm was on the list. She held his gaze. He knows what that means. He wants to understand it in person. She paused. He's that kind of man. When he understands he's done something wrong, even accidentally, even unknowingly, he needs to look at it directly. Ezra thought about that. He thought about a man who'd built a company from a single truck, who'd taken his daughter with him on Saturday routes when she was small, who'd let the wrong person stand too close for too long, and was now reckoning with what that had cost. He can come, Ezra said. Solange looked at him. He can come, he said again, and he can see the farm and we'll talk. She nodded once, the way she nodded when something mattered and words weren't adequate. Dija looked between them, picked up her glass. More cornbread, she said to no one in particular. Yes, Solange and Ezra said at the same time. Dija got up to cut it, and the kitchen was warm and full of food, and the particular kind of noise that only happens in a house that has people in it who mean something to each other. And Ezra Boone stood at the stove and thought about the north fence line finished, after 2 years of meaning to, and thought about a folder with a property assessment, and a foundation and a number at the bottom that was what the land was actually worth. He thought, one thing at a time. Except maybe 2 things. Maybe 2 things at once was manageable. Victor Hargrove arrived on a Wednesday. He drove himself. A practical sedan. Not the kind of vehicle that announced anything. He parked at the end of the drive and walked up because Ezra had seen him turn in and had waited at the porch. Victor was 65 and moved like someone who had spent 40 years working, and then spent a year recovering from something that had taken some of his movement back. He walked with care, not slowness exactly, just deliberateness, like a man who had learned recently not to take forward motion for granted. He stopped at the base of the porch steps, looked up at Ezra, looked at the house, at the fields beyond it, at the gate at the end of the drive, and the 100 acres stretching out on both sides. Mr. Boone, he said, Mr. Hargrove, a beat. Walk with me? Victor said. So they walked. Solange had stayed inside. This had been her call, not Ezra's. She'd said her father needed to do this part himself, that there were things that required 2 people and not 3. Ezra showed him the farm the way he showed anyone who wanted to understand it. The irrigation lines, the fields. The north fence line finished 3 weeks ago. The old oak at the southeast corner that his grandfather had kept as a landmark, and that his father had kept because his grandfather had. Victor walked slowly and looked carefully, and didn't try to fill the silence with words that weren't necessary. At the oak tree he stopped, looked at it for a moment, then looked at Ezra. How long has this tree been here, he said. Before my grandfather bought the land. So at least 80 years, maybe more. Victor looked at it again. My father had a saying, he said. He used to tell me that the land is the one thing you can't fake. Everything else in business, the numbers, the reputation, the relationships can be constructed, can be made to look like something it isn't. He paused. But the land is what it is. It tells the truth even when everyone around it is lying. Ezra said nothing. I let someone lie to me, Victor said, for a long time, because it was easier than asking the questions that would have made things complicated. He looked at Ezra directly. 2 families lost land because of documents I signed. I didn't know what I was signing for, but I signed. You were misled, Ezra said. I was willing to be misled, Victor said. That's different. He looked at the oak tree. I know the difference. I've been a businessman long enough to know when I'm asking the questions that need asking, and when I'm not. Ezra was quiet. The foundation, Victor said. I want you to know it isn't compensation. It isn't a way of buying my conscience clean. He looked at Ezra. I know what my family name almost did to this farm, to what this farm means. No amount of money makes that even. He paused. The foundation is what I can do with what's left of the recovered assets that actually does something worth doing. That's all it is. What happens to the 2 families, Ezra said. The ones whose land was actually taken. We're working with their attorneys, Victor said. The process is complicated. The properties pass through multiple transactions. But we're working. He paused. We're not going to stop working. Ezra looked at the oak tree. He thought about his grandfather driving fence posts into 40 acres of Mississippi red clay. doing something hard so someone could be here. He thought about the folder sitting on his kitchen table, the assessment number, the foundation proposal, the thing he'd been thinking about for 3 weeks without fully deciding. "I'll take the foundation support," he said. Victor looked at him. "For the infrastructure," Ezra said. "The irrigation, the equipment that needs replacing. Not the land itself, not the debt the bank holds on it. I'll handle that." He paused. "I'm not interested in being a recipient. I'm interested in what the farm can demonstrate, what it can show other families who are in the same position I was in 3 months ago." Victor was quiet for a moment. "The foundation's board," he said slowly. "We've been talking about a model farm, a working example of what sustainable operation looks like with adequate infrastructure and support." He paused. "I didn't want to presume." "You're not presuming," Ezra said. "I'm telling you what I'm willing to do." Victor looked at him, and something in the older man's face did the thing that faces do when a person has been carrying a weight and someone has just helped them set it down. Not fully. Not all of it. Some things you carry the rest of your life. But some of it. "My daughter chose well," Victor said. Ezra looked at the oak tree. "We'll see," he said, which was not a disagreement. They walked back to the house. Solange was in the kitchen. She heard them on the porch and came to the door. Looked at her father. Looked at Ezra. Read both of their faces the way she read everything. Accurately. Something in her settled. Not relief exactly. More like the completion of something she'd been holding open for a while. Victor stayed for lunch. Dija had come by, of course she had. Dija had an instinct for exactly when to appear, and the 4 of them ate at the kitchen table that had held Boone family meals for 3 generations and was now holding this one. Victor ate 2 servings of the chicken Ezra had made and said it was the best meal he'd had since his doctors put him on a restricted diet last spring. Dija told him the restricted diet was clearly not the issue if this was what he was eating off it. Victor laughed. Actually laughed. The way a person laughs when they haven't laughed in a while and it surprises them. Solange watched her father laugh, and Ezra watched Solange watch her father laugh, and thought, this is what it looks like when something starts healing. Not fixed. Healing. Which was different, slower, more honest. Victor left at 3 o'clock. He hugged his daughter in the driveway for a long moment. Said something into her hair that Ezra didn't hear. She held him in the careful way you hold a person who has become someone you need to be careful with. Then he got in the practical sedan and drove away. Deja left 20 minutes later. Said she had clients, and also that she knew when she was not needed, which she said with a look at Ezra that was the sisterly equivalent of a hand grenade thrown over her shoulder as she walked to her car. He did not respond. She drove away. The farm was quiet. He and Solange stood in the driveway in the November afternoon. Cold now. Real cold. The kind that had arrived in the last week and intended to stay. He looks better, she said, than he did 3 weeks ago. He moves like a man who has something to do, Ezra said. She looked at him. Yes, she said, he does. They stood there. He thought, say it now. He thought, say what? What exactly? There are several things. He thought, start with one. The board, he said. What did you decide? She looked at the fields. I told them I'd take the role, she said, under my conditions. No managed narrative. Full disclosure in the public filing. An independent audit that I don't control and can't influence. She paused. They agreed because they didn't have a better option. And because, she stopped, because I think some of them actually want to do it right. Not all of them, but enough. And your father, he'll step back formally in January. He'll still be there, but differently. She paused. The way a person is there when they've accepted that the thing they built has outgrown the specific shape they built it in. He thought about that. Thought about his father. About the farm at the end of his father's life. About the ways a person comes to understand that what they've built is bigger than what they can hold alone. Where will you be based, he said. She turned to look at him. That depends on a few things, she said. He held her gaze. Such as, he said. She looked at him for a moment in the way she had of looking at things she was deciding. Accurately. Without sentimentality and without coldness. The way she'd looked at the irrigation coupling and the fence posts and the documentation on the laptop and every other thing she'd decided needed her full attention. There's a foundation that needs establishing, she said. The board work can be done remotely. Some of it needs to be done in person. She paused. In Holt County specifically, if the model farm program moves forward the way I think it should. That's work, he said. Yes. You'd be here for work. She looked at him. I'd be here, she said. For several reasons. One of which is work. The November air was cold and still, and the fields were the late fall gold that was almost brown now, getting ready to turn fully and rest through the winter, he thought. This is the moment. He thought, don't say something complicated. Say the true thing. I'd like that, he said. Simple, plain, true. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then so would I, not a declaration, not a promise. Just two people saying a true thing to each other in a driveway in November, on a farm that had survived a long list of things that should have ended it, which was enough. Which was, in fact, exactly enough. He said, I need to check the south irrigation line before dark. She said, I know. Show me the reading you want to see on the pressure gauge. You remember the gauge. I remember everything you've shown me. She looked at him. Are you surprised? He thought about it. No, he said. She almost smiled. He almost smiled back. They went around to the south field. The last of the afternoon light was doing what it did in November. Lower, more angled, longer shadows. The kind of light that made everything look like it had been here forever and intended to stay. He showed her the pressure gauge. She read it, said what the reading meant, got it right. He adjusted a fitting that had been creeping loose. She held the line while he tightened it. They had done this before. The rhythm was there. Easy now. The kind of easy that takes time to build. 3 weeks ago, she'd been zip-tied to a gate at 4:45 in the morning, with one shoe and a ruined dress, and a flash drive hidden in her pocket, and more courage than he'd known what to do with. 3 weeks ago, he'd had a letter from the bank he hadn't opened, and a farm he was trying to keep, and 90 days before something changed. Things had changed. Not all the way. Not cleanly. The bank situation was still what it was until the foundation paperwork cleared. The investigation had another 6 months before it resolved fully. Desmond's legal team was going to make the process as long as they could make it, because that was what they were paid to do. But the north fence was finished. The irrigation coupling on the east line was holding. The south pressure gauge read what it was supposed to read. And there was a woman standing in his south field in November, in shoes that were not designed for a south field, who knew what a pressure gauge reading meant and could hold a line steady while he worked. He thought, that's something. He thought, that's actually quite a lot. They walked back to the house as the last of the light went. She made tea. He made the kind of dinner you make when you have good ingredients and no particular agenda. They ate at the kitchen table, talked about the foundation's model program, about what demonstration farming actually looked like, about the families in Holt County who had received letters from shell companies in the last 2 years and might not have understood what those letters meant, about Deja and what she was building, about Aldous Whitfield, who had called Ezra twice since everything resolved. Not about the case, just to talk, the way a man calls when he's been reminded that he has people and wants to make sure they know it, about Victor. About the particular courage it took for a man who had spent 40 years building something to look at what his name had been attached to and say, I could have prevented this. At some point the conversation stopped being about any of those things specifically and became about all of them generally, the way late evening conversations do when you've run through the practical and arrived somewhere quieter. He said, what does it feel like, now that it's done? She was quiet for a moment. Like, I've been running at full speed for 14 months, she said. And I stopped. And now I can feel every part of myself that I didn't have time to feel while I was running. She looked at the table. Some of it isn't great. No. But some of it is. She looked up at him. Being here is some of it. He held her gaze. Said nothing. Because she'd said the thing and it was true and he didn't need to add to it. Later he would think about this moment. This specific evening. The kitchen and the tea and the November dark outside the windows, and the woman Akraham who had arrived at his gate with nothing and was still here with something. He would think about what his grandfather had done, with 40 acres and a belief that it was worth holding. He would think about his father's face. He would think about the particular way courage looked when it was the quiet kind, The kind that didn't announce itself. The kind that just kept showing up. That night he lay awake for a while. Not worrying. Just thinking. Thinking about the foundation proposal on the kitchen table. About what it would mean for the farm to be a demonstration of something. To be the thing other families could point to and say, that's what it looks like when it works. To do something hard so someone else could. He fell asleep around midnight. And in the morning at 4:45, the same alarm. The same dark. The same floorboards in the same 3 places. Except there was light already coming from under the kitchen door. He paused at the bottom of the stairs. Thought she's already up. Thought of course she is. He pushed open the kitchen door. She was at the window with her coffee mug. The way she did it. The particular angle of her, looking out at the dark fields. Waiting for the light the way the land waited for the light. She heard him. Didn't turn around. The pressure gauge on the south line, she said. I want to check it this morning. The reading last night was close to the lower threshold. He went to the coffee pot. I saw that too, he said. I thought you did. He poured. Stood beside her at the window. The dark was still full and complete, the fields invisible beneath it. But coming the way it always came. One thing at a time, he said. She turned to look at him, close now. The kitchen was not a large kitchen. It had never needed to be. Or 2 things, she said. He looked at her. Or 2, he said. Outside, the first gray of the morning was beginning to show at the very edge of the horizon. Not light yet, just the suggestion of it. The idea that light was coming and intended to arrive. The 100 acres of Boone land lay quiet beneath it, patient. Red clay and fence posts and irrigation lines and 1 oak tree at the southeast corner that had been there longer than anyone could account for. Still there, still holding. And in the kitchen, 2 people stood at the window with coffee mugs and watched the dark begin to give way to the thing that always came after it. And it was enough. And it was real, and it was theirs.